Hello and welcome to Very Much Mistaken with Chris Parrott and
James Parrott.
We are here for round 5 of our new Formula 1 podcast. Round 4 of the season has just been concluded. The Spanish Grand Prix from Barcelona. Always been the Spanish Grand Prix. Always been at Barcelona. Easy to remember what it's called. No questions asked. And it was another good race, I thought. James, what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, as Barcelona races go, it was actually pretty good. I think the difference in strategy is probably the main thing that made it exciting and just gave that kind of variety to it. But as we'll discuss, there are still some just like fundamental things that frustrate you when you have to watch a race like that, or when you go to specifically like somewhere like Barcelona to race. But I mean, yeah, again, we just saw Mercedes and Lewis's skill come to the fore. I think Toto Wolff afterwards said, like on the radio to Lewis, he was like, that was like a combination of like Mercedes tactics and your skill that delivered that win. So like, nice one. And yeah, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah, it's a real illustration of how Formula 1 is a team sport and how you can... being successful in any sport is not, or being successful in Formula 1 is not just about having the quickest car. It's about being the best overall team and maximising the performance of that car through having very good drivers, having very good synergy between the drivers and the team thinking clearly about what its best option is at any given moment. And all of those parts, the pit wall, the mechanics, the drivers, executing the race as best they can.
Yeah, and it's funny because you think about Mercedes and the turbo hybrid era Mercedes and how they haven't really, apart from like a brief period when Ferrari built a rocket engine, they haven't really had any challenges. It's just been them two at the two Mercedes drivers at the front, and they just have to worry about each other. They don't really have to worry about the rest of the pack. And it made you think that when they got into a fight, would they be prepared for it? Because they haven't had to. I mean, likewise, because of just how the kind of like teams have turned out. There was a period where it was kind of Red Bull were just racing themselves as well. So you had like Red Bull racing themselves in the middle of the pack was quite interesting. Now they're both having to race each other. They're actually, for the first time in a long while, both in essentially a dogfight every single race. Splitting, like drivers are splitting the front of the grid in their qualifying. And at the moment, the Mercedes have come out on top. And you'd have to say that it's because they've probably been, I mean, Spain and Portugal more Mercedes tracks, but also they've committed less errors. They've made the most of their opportunities, and they've taken their opportunities. So, I mean, if you think back to Bahrain, essentially, Max was in the same position that Lewis was today, but Max didn't deliver when Lewis did, and he had every opportunity to, but he didn't. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a number of reasons as to why that's the case, but it kind of just, yeah, in a nutshell, shows like the difference between the two teams, I think, at the moment.
And it was one of the things that no one knew what the answer was at the start of the season, when it became apparent that Red Bull had made this performance step and we're going to push Mercedes very hard at the front of the grid, and possibly could even be the strongest car driver combination on the grid. How would Mercedes respond to that? And the answer to that, it seems, is that they have really raised their game, and they being everyone, not just Lewis, who's performing brilliantly. This has been his strongest start to any season in his Formula 1 career, but also the team on making strategy calls that put their driver in the best possible position to maximise his results, or Lewis maximise his result on any given weekend. And I wonder, moving forward, if we were to evaluate the past 4 races, it kind of feels like it was, in terms of track favourability. It was 2 for Red Bull, 2 for Mercedes, the last 2 being the Mercedes tracks and the first 2 being the Red Bull tracks. But the difference isn't enough to guarantee a win. So based on performance alone. So it's going to be that complete package and that complete set of skills and experience that the teams have, which is going to contribute to making the difference. Because I think on track, the performance between Lewis and Verstappen is very close. I'd say Lewis is edging it at the moment. He's making fewer mistakes and has been able to make the most of whatever strategy call the team has made. And there was an interesting comment from Lewis in his post-race interview demonstrating the trust he has with his team, how he said he thought on the lap he came in that he had gotten in a position to maybe pass Max, and he wasn't, he thought about not coming in, but he trusted the team and did come in, dropped back, but gave himself a big advantage with the tyres, and as we all know, was able to claw up a big gap and was able to pass Max. But there are some interesting questions to think. If Mercedes are the gold standard of teamwork, and if you reverse the roles and think what would they have done differently, so I think obviously Mercedes brought Lewis in, surprised Red Bull, executed a pit stop, and you have to consider how much of that is planned for it to be executed so well, in a way that we saw on that race other teams weren't able to when they made late calls. So Mercedes didn't make a late call to bring Lewis in. They made a disguised call because they had all the tyres ready. Mercedes is the first team in the garage, so they've got from the car coming in to him arriving 400 meters later to be ready for him, because they didn't want to show their hand too early. So this was all planned. It wasn't a last minute decision. Okay, Lewis, you're coming in now. But it was all planned, but also made to look last minute, so they didn't tip Red Bull off in any way. Executed the pit stop perfectly. And then you're in this tense situation for a lap, basically, where you're trying to see, as Red Bull, if we come in now, do we stay ahead? Because if you leave it any longer, you know you're not going to. And the answer to that question, it looked like from the graphics that were available to you watching, the answer was yes. If they'd reacted straight away and executed their pit stop, Verstappen would have been able to stay ahead, and then they would have been on an equal footing in terms of tyre performance. So was that a dropped ball, do we think, by Red Bull? And do we think Mercedes would have reacted?
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird one, because you're kind of thinking if I think if Red Bull had pitted Max straight away, Hamilton would have essentially just undercut him then. And I
don't think he would have, though.
He was within a second of
but
Max when he went in.
They showed a graphic the lap after.
Yeah.
And the delta, and you could see it on the lap time. Yeah. He was still a second and a half behind Verstappen.
Okay, so it would have been close.
So it would have been close. They would have had to have executed the pit stop.
Yeah.
But that was the information made available by the graphics that you could watch suggested that if they had reacted straight away, he would have come in. And if that was our information, you would assume they would have had that information as well. They just didn't make that call.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there was a tyre issue with it, because obviously they made a big point about how Mercedes kept back 2 sets of mediums, and I assume that must have meant that Red Bull only kept 1 back. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if they were like hamstrung by the fact that they had those tyre allocations left over. So it would have been the case that they'd have brought him in a lap later, probably had to go on the softs then, and maybe have been in a similar situation at the end of the race, struggling for tyre wear and grip. But yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, because you think that if he goes out on the softs, then he should be pulling away. He should be pulling away enough until like a few laps to the end, and then just has to defend for his life, whilst Hamilton's on the slightly better tyres. So I think you do. It seems to me that most of the time being proactive with these things is a good way to go. Or I mean, for instance, in Bahrain, Mercedes were proactive in pitting Lewis early to kind of like negate the undercut, and that put them in like that kind of like put the shoe on Red Bull's foot to like think, okay, now what we're going to do.
Or as Murray would say, the shoe is on the other. No, the boot is on the other Schumacher. Which isn't even a mixed metaphor. It just doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make sense.
But you get the gist.
Yeah. And I think that's where, maybe that's where Mercedes has been a bit better. They've been the kind of like proactive team, forcing Red Bull's hand most of the time, and I think Red Bull kind of have to now be thinking in that way as well.
Well, perhaps this is the difference between the two teams in terms of where they've come from and their past recent experience. Mercedes, with having both made their first stops, Verstappen and Hamilton, Mercedes were in a position where they had to say, okay, what can we do to give ourselves a chance to win? Because we think if we just do what they do, they're going to keep track position, and we're not quick enough on equal grip to pass Verstappen. I think they had the stronger overall package, which always helps in these kind of battles. But as Bahrain showed, that wasn't everything. So they recognised, right, if we come in, if we surprise them, if we come in, we go onto a new set of medium tyres, back Lewis to make up the difference and arrive at Verstappen with enough grip left to make the pass. And even if he can't, we're still in second. So that is a winning mentality, isn't it? And always looking for a way to give yourself a performance advantage in a situation where you're at a disadvantage. And you've got to think that these are scenarios which the team have thought of and have played out and know that they're going for. And you hear this on the team radio all the time, where we're sort of like plan C, plan B, and everyone knows what these things mean. But sort of knowing when to pull the trigger on something, how exactly what it is you need to do to execute that move, from surprising them that you are coming in, to executing the pit stop, to nailing the laps thereafter to close the gap and be in a position when you catch up to still be able to pass vis-a-vis grip. All of those things it's so much more than just the fact that you've got the quicker car, which builds a performance which gives you a race win. And Mercedes bring that experience of the past 7 years to every single race that they come to, which means they're so much harder to beat than just through performance on track, because you can't fake that experience and that knowledge about what it takes to win. It's a part of yours. If it's a part of what you've experienced for the previous number of years, it's just innate and it's just within you. Probably one of the reasons why Red Bull are trying to poach so many of Mercedes' people, because they need to tap into that experience. Bearing that in mind, I've been trying to think what could Red Bull have done to flip the tail, to flip the scenario, and this is a lot harder to say. This strategy move is a lot harder to pull, to actually go for when you're making the real decisions, because it requires you to give up the lead. But I think what they needed to do was, as soon as they needed to make a calculation of what is the ideal lap in terms of performance of the tyres and laps left in the race, to put Verstappen onto the softs, so that he has a fresher tyre and a naturally faster compounded tyre, for him to then go about and chase Lewis. So the reason why, because that, I think, in hindsight, was their best chance of winning the race, given what you knew at the end of the race about how easy it was for Lewis to pass Max. But they didn't know it would have been that easy at the time. But on the other hand, I think Max did. He knew from what you heard on his radio communications with his team and how he was communicating about how the tyres were performing, that he was going to be a sitting duck, the sitting duck that he was. So the bold call that perhaps Mercedes would have made would have been with, if it was 15 laps to go, right, we're bringing Max in. He's going to be 12 seconds behind Lewis, but he's got 15 laps to catch him, and he's going to arrive there on a lesser used tyre and a quicker tyre as well. Mercedes built this whole big picture philosophy around the whole weekend of recognising that they might need an extra set of fresh mediums to run on at the end of the race. Keeping those in their back pocket is all part of just a winning team knowing what it needs to do to maximise its performance to win a race. And not just relying on the fact that they've got the best package at the weekend, knowing that, okay, well, yes, we're faster than Red Bull, but if Red Bull get in front, it's going to be very difficult to beat them because of the characteristics of the circuit.
Yeah, and so obviously Max relatively early on was saying he wasn't going to get to the end, and it was almost like they were too committed to their like plan that they had, and they were like, no, this is what we've already committed to this. We can't then change it, and it's kind of like that the sunk cost fallacies. Like, we're already too far in. We can't now kind of like change what we want to do. Whereas if they had been essentially proactive, gone for that more risky but more kind of like aggressive move of bringing him in, so we had the soft tyres to try and overtake Lewis at the end of the race instead. They really should have known that that would have been at least given them a more of a fighting chance of like coming back, as opposed to essentially they just accepted after a certain point that they were coming second. And you do wonder whether because like Max on those soft tyres is like the fastest guy on the track.
But even if they accepted, okay, we're coming second, that's the point that you do come in and give up first.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think there wasn't the clarity of thought that comes with the experience of winning all the time, and the muscle memory that builds in your system of just knowing what the best thing to do in any given moment and any given situation is, and backing yourself and making that call.
Yeah, I mean, there was a few other points. So I remember Lewis after the race said that, so once we were into second, we changed our plan to go to the 2-stop because that we knew that was what we had to do to win. You wonder whether Red Bull had properly planned what they would have to do if they were leading the race from a reasonably early point. For instance, after the first corner. Because they're starting in second. They can't assume that Max is going to overtake Lewis at the first corner. They have to assume that they're going to have to build a plan that will enable him to overtake him at some point in the race and then maintain that. And whether they were maybe slightly unprepared to be leading the race so early on, which meant that they didn't have everything planned out that they should have done to know how to react to Mercedes going onto the 2-stop. And again, because I imagine like there's probably a lot of decision making that happens kind of like live on the track, but I reckon so much of it is like schemed beforehand because they realise that actually trying to make quick decisions on track and trying to calculate things like that is actually very difficult, and instead building these like roadmaps for each possibility, and then the decision making point is which roadmap to go with as opposed to what the roadmap's going to be. You wonder whether there just wasn't quite the plan there for Red Bull that Mercedes appeared to have, because they probably had a plan for leading the race, which might have been like a 1-stop, but they probably would have hoped to have gone a bit further on the softs than Max did, because he actually came in quite early on the softs, I remember. And that probably didn't help his stint on the mediums. But they also had a plan. They clearly had a plan for if they were in second place at some point, which is, it's a funny thing to assume that you're going to be, but actually when you know that the aim of the race is not to be second at any point, it's to be first at the end, then planning to be second at some point seems like a very smart thing to do.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting way of looking at it, and it's one of the features of this season of having two teams that are so evenly matched at the front is you have to think of an F1 race, it seems, as a game of chess where you have to think, okay, what are they going to do if they find themselves, just to make that clearer, if you're Red Bull, you've got to think, what are Mercedes going to do if they find themselves in second at halfway through the race? And you can think, well, they're probably not just going to settle for it, because at halfway through the race we're likely to be far enough away from the pack where there's going to be a gap, and this will get us onto the next topic. Actually, there's going to be a gap for them to drop into to be able to make a pit stop and not lose a position, and then come through and put us under pressure. So if you think, well, that's what they're going to do, what are we going to do to counter that? If their answer was, well, we're just going to stay out, that was the wrong answer. And I think, and this is the point we're ultimately making, that was apparent at a point where you could have still done something about it, and they didn't. So that's something for Red Bull to reflect on. One of the complicating factors for Red Bull, of course, was the fact that they had one dog in this fight, whereas Mercedes had two, more or less. And there was an interesting moment, wasn't there, where Valtteri was given the order to not hold Lewis Hamilton up, and then did hold him up, and even looked like he was going to sort of fight him to get through. And to open that up to include Red Bull, I feel like we are getting to the point in the season already where team orders is going to become a pretty explicit part of their strategies moving forward to try and beat each other. And focusing on Red Bull, I think that this is the first point in the season now where some pressure is going to start to come on Perez to perform consistently and try and get a bit more out of the car. Even though we said last week that he's done the best of all of the drivers that have found themselves in a new team this year, but the fight is so close with Mercedes that Red Bull need him to be up there, because Mercedes knew that, well, we can bring Lewis in because he's just going to come up to Valtteri. Valtteri's going to let him through, just about. We don't have to worry about the other Red Bull messing things up. Red Bull didn't have that luxury, and that would have been one of the reasons why they maybe thought against bringing Verstappen in, because they knew, I think at that stage in the race, at a time when it would have been appropriate for him to come in, he would have to get past Bottas as well, which he probably would have been able to do, but that's just one other variable that's going to make you question whether that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's very different when you're making these decisions when you're like in a championship race than when you're kind of like when you're in the middle of the pack, because you can. So Mercedes have done team orders. Sorry, McLaren have done team orders twice already. They in San Marino, Ricciardo had to let Norris through because he was just had a quicker pace. I think they were on the same strategy. He just had better pace. Whereas in this one, Ricciardo was on a different strategy, so Norris had to let him through. And then he
let Alonso through as well. I'm not sure if they told him to do that, but he either wasn't aware that who was behind.
I'm fairly certain it was Ocon or Alonso.
It was one of the Alpines. Either he didn't know, or he just did it at a really bad moment.
He did it at a bad moment.
He put himself under a lot of pressure.
Yeah, he did it before like turn 5 or something. And
luckily, he was able to get it back. But
actually, no, it's turn 7, I think.
Yeah.
And so in that situation, there's like the pressure's still on to do well, obviously, but one driver not performing is not going to have as like big an impact on the team as like when you're at the top. So because it has like massive impacts on whoever comes first in the championship. Mercedes having two settled drivers does seem to be helping out a lot, and it's a thing that whereas a McLaren or Alpine or Aston Martin can be more patient with their number 2 driver, essentially, or the new driver, you might say. Red Bull can't quite be as patient because they kind of have to be like, we need you to be up here so we can put pressure on Mercedes along with Verstappen. And it's not, and this is not to say that not to say that they're like at all thinking about getting rid of Sergio Perez, but they do have to like, they will be far more like proactive on making sure that Sergio's getting performance out of the car.
It's not. It's a difficult conversation because I don't think it's you're not doing good enough. It's you're doing really well, but we're in a fight here. We need you to do even better.
Yeah.
Which, if a driver feels like he's getting the most that he can out of a package, it can be difficult for them to know where to find that extra lap time or to find that consistency. But ultimately, I think that was Mercedes' trump card, was the fact that they had a backup, a wingman who could support Lewis's strategy in terms of more or less getting out of his way when he was coming through, but then be a foil for Verstappen. And it was only when Bottas came in to go for the fastest lap that there was that margin for Verstappen then, as soon as he was passed, to come in to go for it as well.
Yeah, and I think this has to be like a lesson for Red Bull as well, because so obviously that during the week leading up to the race, there's a big thing about how they're thinking of changing Bottas for Russell, and like they just like categorically said no, we don't do that. That would not be good for the team. And I'm part of the reason must be that they want two settled drivers in a car they know really well to be able to perform every week, and bringing in Russell might not be the best option when you really want just the stability that comes with Bottas and Hamilton. And when you think about how Red Bull treat their number two drivers, I mean, the decisions they've made, you can understand a bit. Like Gasly wasn't performing that well when he was there. Albon was okay, but still not really good enough. And I think bringing in Perez was definitely the right option. But I think now they're kind of like ruining all these times where they could have got in a more like a better number two driver to get settled in the car to then build up to this championship fight where they're both going to be able to be just hitting the ground running with the car, as opposed to having to go through this like acclimatization stage that actually is having a massive impact on their ability to like to put pressure on Mercedes and ultimately try and win the championship. And I think this will be a lesson, and it must be a lesson for them going into next season, being with all the new regulations, with everything that's going to be changing, we do not want to be changing our drivers.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a bit of reflection that Red Bull need to do there, and I think there's two things they need to think about. Is with all of these guys that have come in and out in the last few seasons, and a lot of those transitions happening during a season, why is it that another team is getting more out of these guys than they are? Someone like Gasly is a great example of someone who performed really well in a Toro Rosso, went into Red Bull and didn't perform, then went back into Toro Rosso, now AlphaTauri, and is performing really well again. So what is it about the Red Bull environment where they're not getting the most out of a driver of his talents? You could say the same is true of Kvyat. You can say the same is true of Albon to an extent. The onus is very much put on the drivers, because everyone looks at Max and what he can do in the car, and people think, well, this is a good team, it's a good car, Max can win races, why isn't this guy performing? But on the other hand, that's three really talented drivers who have gone into that environment and not been able to maximize themselves, and that's a question for Red Bull to answer. But then also that whole philosophy is, even if they are putting zero pressure on Perez at all, puts pressure on him, because he knows that Red Bull take that approach with a driver who, that in their eyes, isn't performing or is underperforming. So they can be as enthusiastic and supportive to him, to his face in public, as they like. But he knows in the back of his mind, well, they do, the axe can fall here. And what does that do to him? Does that enhance his performance? Does he relish that challenge, or does that negatively impact his challenge? I don't know. We'll see. But that all speaks to just a broader strategy that maybe Red Bull need to look at themselves.
Yeah, and it's not, and you're not even. It's not even saying like, you guys need to just stop getting rid of your drivers so soon, because like for the car that they built, you can easily agree that Kvyat Gasly and Albon weren't doing well enough, but they then just have to look at their like talent ID side of it, like the decision making processes that go into picking these drivers in the first place. So it's not. Yeah, so that's kind of like probably how they have to look at it, and then as you say, once we pick these drivers, how do we create an environment that enables them to perform as well as they can? And obviously each driver is different. Each people get motivated by different things, so that's obviously something that have to be taken into account. And you just think that hopefully they know that with Perez they've got a really good driver. They've got to give him the most confidence they can that they're not getting rid of him anytime soon. Because even if and I don't even think this is a conversation they're even thinking about, but as you said, their past history suggests that could be the case, and I don't know if that's. I can't imagine most people would want to race in an environment like that. They'd want to race in an environment where they feel completely comfortable with their job, particularly at this early stage in their like career, in his career at Red Bull. So they just need to hopefully be just taking a few leaves out of Mercedes books and how they handle their drivers, maybe.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, Mercedes have had in this entire era, they've had in the turbo hybrid era, they've had 3 drivers for the entire length of it. Well, 4 if you count Russell, but that consistency in the cockpit has helped them have the success that they've had on track. You mentioned, how teams approach their driver lineups going into next year, and there's going to be a lot of differences in terms of the cars and how they perform. And how is this race, do you think, different? What if we take Barcelona? It's a track that F1 has gone to every season since 1991. The teams do hours and hours of testing on there, so it's the most kind of it's got a mixture of fast corners, slow corners, medium speed corners while they do all the testing there. So it's like it's your blueprint Formula One track. What does a great race in 2022 look like, or the race that we just had? How is it different? What are we expecting it to be different about it next year?
I mean, I think the difference the race would be is that drivers are able to push their car to the limit at most points on the track when in traffic and things, and when trailing cars, because I mean there was a fascinating bit when Perez was behind I think it was Ricciardo, and going around the long turn 3 or 4, I think it's 3, the long one after the first, turn 1, 2, long turn 3, and he's trailing Ricciardo, and he just completely loses all downforce because of the dirty air, and it just goes off the track and just has no power to do it. And you look at that and you're like, that is not that there is, and obviously the track is just, there's like moments like that all across the track where drivers are just fighting with this like poor like airflow, and you're like, that's just not conducive to good racing. When you get close to a car, you then can't drive fast enough to get past them. And obviously this is what they've put lots of effort in to try and sort out for next year. But yeah, I mean, you would want driver skill to be the driver skill, and teams car development work to be the main factor inhibiting or the main factor influencing the racing, not the fact that cars push air in a really awkward way that means that other cars can't function.
Yeah, and hopefully a more satisfying climax to a battle on track, which feels more authentic. And it was, you said earlier that this was, as Barcelona races go, this one was pretty entertaining, and it was. But even then, there was, ironically, the circumstances had aligned where I think Lewis probably was so much faster than Verstappen, especially in terms of being in the key sort of traction zone going onto the long straight, where he would have been able to stay close enough around that final corner to pass Verstappen without DRS. And in a way, we were robbed of a potential battle between the two going side by side because of DRS, because it made it so easy for Hamilton's. And it's one of the things that you have to sort of remember with DRS is because you've got less drag, you are able to carry more speed past the car you're overtaking in a way that if you're in someone's slipstream without DRS, you can travel faster than them in their slipstream, but as soon as you pull alongside them, you lose that pull. And invariably what that means is you arrive at the corner next to them rather than just zooming past them as they do with DRS. So that is just, and that is more authentic. It's not just like you push a button and it means you get past. It's more exciting because it's side by side and just generally more satisfying. And it's a shame that Barcelona is just a classic example where you had to have DRS for anyone to be able to pass anyone, but it still kind of robbed us of what could have been a really close battle for a few laps. And, you know, Hamilton still might have passed Verstappen, but we might have had a bit of a battle for 2 or 3 laps between them before he finally did, because that, you know, the one of the best battles in the DRS era was the, you know, Rosberg and Hamilton in 2014, where they were at each other lap after lap. But that is so rare in the DRS era, because if DRS is working, then you're quick enough to get past, so you do get past, and if it's not working, you're not quick enough to get past, so you don't, so you never get alongside them. It's either one or the other. And hopefully next season, if they are able to follow closely and potentially don't need DRS, then that's more exciting racing. And I was thinking about your idea you said last year about how, you know, how more exciting it would be if you do have DRS, if it's a tool that they can deploy at their own, you know, at a moment of their choosing as a tactic. So if Verstappen had some DRS saved up, he could have defended Hamilton for like a couple of laps. Or he could have deliberately not used it as Hamilton was closing up because he knew, I'm going to need it to defend. And that kind of tactic would improve the racing if you do need DRS. And I wonder if it's possible for them to be able to track, you know, how long it's been deployed, and if that's the reason why they don't do it that way or not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, how my idea would be like implemented. They would have to go through like tests and like understand what's the best way of doing it, whether it's like number of opens or period of time to have it open. I feel like if we were gonna just like go into a bit of detail about it, just the number of times you open it is probably the simplest way, even though I think time open gives a bit more creativity and a bit more onus on the driver. But I imagine, to be honest, the technology they have on these cars and the sensors that, I mean, if they can sense the temperature of the tyres in the car or the temperature of the exhaust, I'm fairly certain they can count how long a back wing's open. So I don't think that should be an issue, really.
I love the old school sensor technology in Alfa Romeo of a mechanic just smashing a tyre and working out that it's flat. I mean, I don't wonder how many hundreds of thousands of pounds that sensor cost. It was quite good. It was quite good though. What I wanted to know is if that was the official signal for flat tyre. If you just smack it, make a cross, smack the tyre as hard as you can. Everyone knows. Cancel the pit stop. We need to get a new set.
It's funny because it was a bit of theatre done by him, because he obviously was like, I've got to make it really, really obvious why we're cancelling this pit stop. I mean, I assume they have like,
I don't know.
I assume they're mic'd up in there. They must be able to communicate with each other. But he was also just like, I've really got to make this obvious. So he like really expressively just pounded this tyre.
They're probably not. And there's no chance of him being able to communicate with his voice if they're not. What the problem is, so it'd have to be a visual cue. I
guess because in a pit stop they're all doing visual cues, because when they finish with the gun they lift it in the air, and that to show they're down on the wheel. So you know, maybe that was the best way of communicating that this tyre's flat, which is fair play to them then.
No, it was a really nice moment, and a shame for Giovinazzi, who I think it happened to. I think you're just never quite satisfied in the same way with a DRS pass. Even if it's quite a good battle, even if they're get alongside each other, because it's just not quite authentic. So I really hope that it is not a feature moving forward. I think it has been a really good feature of the past 10 years. It's improved the racing. It means teams can take the kind of risks that Mercedes did today, because if you don't think you can pass on track, regardless of the performance advantage you have vis-a-vis tyres or drivers or car performance, then you're not going to take those risks in terms of losing track position. And DRS has enabled a lot of those strategies, but nevertheless it's just not as satisfying as going side by side.
And the thing is, we actually got lulled. We kind of had a bit of a kind of like a good couple of races that were good because of DRS. So Bahrain was good, and the DRS worked actually really well in that race, I thought. The passing felt like, particularly I think it was at turn 4, the passing felt good down there, and that was because they had DRS coming out of that on that straight. And then also San Marino, the DRS felt like it was doing a good job there. But I feel like with Portugal and with Spain, we've been brought back down to earth, and we're reminded why we don't really like it that much.
If they could change the zones so that it's not used. They don't put it in zones where you can overtake. They put it in zones approaching places you can overtake to put you in a position to make us kind of like a more even pass. So could they? Barcelona wouldn't work because I think they have it along the entire straight. But if you've got a really long straight, could you have it just off the corner leading onto the straight, but then you have to close it before you get to the braking zone? So the zone isn't to a braking zone; it's to like halfway down the straight, which puts you in a position to get a slipstream that you can then use the slipstream to make a pass.
Yeah, I mean, I know, because I remember, I think Martin Brundle spoke about how much they try and calculate where to open DRS so it puts the car alongside at the end of the straight. So they do think about that, but apparently he was just like, it appears that there are so many variables that you can never do it. However, giving someone a little jump start at the start of a straight does kind of make sense. I mean, there's a chance that they've like thought about all of these things, and they came to the conclusion that just having it open is the best way. But I mean, and so like places like Barcelona, with the current car makeup, unfortunately, you do just have slightly unsatisfying races, and you can tell when a track isn't really right for F1 at the moment, when all you can see is on the track map as you're watching it, with the cars going round, just like groups of cars constantly in the same position going round, because no matter how, because there's just one car that has got so much more pace than the car in front, but they just don't have there's nowhere or no ability, there's nothing that allows them to pass, because either dirty air or there's no good overtaking zones. And if you looked at Barcelona, the amount of groups of cars that just go around the track was so frequent.
Yeah, I agree to a point. I think it was quite exciting when there was a big group stuck behind Alonso, ultimately because they were eventually able to get past. And it was a shame. It was a shame that Russell. I think that was made by the fact that it was Alonso and then Russell. So Russell was faster than Alonso, but he wasn't. He was slower than everyone behind him, so he wasn't fast enough to pass him. But he was also a bit quicker than him, so it's harder for the cars behind Russell to pass Russell. But eventually, everyone did. It was very nearly a good race for him, because at one point he was in 10th on merit in terms of strategy, because Williams came in early, and I thought maybe he was going to get his first point for Williams, but then it all fell to pieces. They just sort of ran out of tyre performance. So tracks that we don't like, well, if you could take out 3 or 4 tracks from the calendar based purely on consistently underperforming in terms of exciting races, which ones what are your least favourite?
I feel like this should be you can't choose Abu Dhabi or Russia
because they're too obvious.
That obviously we're going
They're
to
gone. There are 21 races this year. Abu Dhabi and Russia are not happening. Apart from them, what's your next least favourite?
Okay, I'm just looking.
Just based on the calendar as it is currently,
Yeah,
because obviously it's subject to change. You'll hear me typing as I bring the calendar up. So the first one I go to, and this is always controversial, but it's nevertheless a disappointing race more times than not, is Monaco. And when you talk about a track where the cars have outgrown, Monaco is that track in so many respects.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, it's not really a race, it's like a parade, and it's just an opportunity for, it's more of a festival with a parade at it than like you're watching the race. And I mean, the thing is, it does mean that the qualifying can be quite interesting, because obviously that's all it rides on, but then you're there afterward, you're there for the race, and you'd actually just like to be there and not watching it as opposed to watching it on TV. Because I mean, I can't remember, was it Jean Alesi who described Monaco as like trying to drive race around your apartment on a road bike or something? He was just like, and that was back in late 80s, early 90s when Alesi was driving, and I think you said the cars are even bigger now, so it's like trying to do it.
Well, they're physically bigger. They're too fast.
Yeah.
There's not enough variability with strategy either. I think usually it's just a one stop. So there's just literally no opportunity to put yourself in some clean air to pass some cars if you are stuck behind someone, or overtake on track, unless there's some really big tyre degradation issues happening. So it's a spectacle, and sport is, and theatre is a spectacle, but it's not a very interesting race on track.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously we're deciding this based purely on like race, on like how enjoyable the race is.
Yeah, I'd be tempted on many fronts to.
But the thing is, like when you watch an onboard of a driver doing a hot lap around Monaco, it is the most impressive one out of all of them.
So maybe it should just be a qualifying event.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like,
just do a time trial,
because like you in the calendar you want variety, and you want different ways to challenge drivers, and you want different ways to challenge cars. And the one thing you can say about Monaco is it really, really challenges drivers and cars.
Yeah.
And it's like,
but even then, I don't think it does in the same way.
For qualifying, not for the race, because during the race they obviously kind of just sit back because they know it's all about track position, so they can just coast. But but when they're like when they know they have to put in a lap, and if you watch Danny Ricciardo's hot lap from, I think it was 2018 when he got pole and then won. Obviously, he got pole. It was the one. It was like 2 years after he got the bad. He was leading and then had a bad pit stop, or they forgot to bring the tyres out or something. If you watch that one, I think it's the fastest ever lap round Monaco. You're like, oh, okay, I'm really glad this is a race because I got to see someone do something like that.
But then you could go to Goodwood and be amazed at how quickly racing cars go on a really narrow bit of tarmac up a hill. So I'm not very enamoured with it at all, truth be told. But do we agree from a racing point of view?
From a racing spectacle point of view.
Okay, Monaco is gone.
but I actually wouldn't get rid of it if I was like.
I mean, for a time it was the only street circuit on the calendar, and that gave it a certain panache from my point of view. But now there are a few street circuits. So, it's a lot of, almost all of its magic has gone for me.
So if I was going to go for my next one, and I'm not entirely sure about this, but I'm fairly certain I'm not a fan of it, and it's Hungary.
Hungary.
Yeah. I think that would be on the next one on the list. I'd be like, I'm not sure the racing there is really
improved when they extended the start-finish straight, and often gets the benefit of some unpredictable weather. Where it's scheduled, but it can often be a lights to flag. I'd be inclined to do away with Hungary.
Oh, another. So I've got my third one. If we have to move on from Hungary, I also really, really don't like the US track.
Yeah,
I find it's one of these ones where I think it's a Hermann Tilke track, and it's one of these ones where he's gone like straight fast corners, straight slow section, and he's kind of like just put in this like blueprint of what he thinks needs to be in a race, in a racing circuit. And but actually, because of how it's so segmented in its like areas, it's actually just like really dull. Like it seems like it lacks, it's really trying to like satisfy everything, and in the end actually it doesn't really satisfy anything.
It's like, it's sort of like Grand Prix circuit by market research. They've got 20 people in a room and asked, what do you really love about a Formula One racing track?
It's like, oh, I like it when they go on like really long straights. And you're like, okay.
I like it when they go around slow corners. I like it when they go around fast corners. Okay.
Yeah, and it's just, and you can just tell that like a lot of the really,
it was literally that, wasn't it? It was designed. The sections are designed off other circuits.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
The fast corners are based on Silverstone. It's the only one I know. I don't know what the other corners are based on.
Silverstone
the triple right is based on Turkey's quadruple left.
Yeah, and the thing is, like when you look at historic tracks, and one of the things that we should say is that there are a lot of really good tracks that still don't necessarily produce the best racing. Like Silverstone's like famous. It's because it's fast, and it's very technical. It's actually sometimes isn't the most interesting thing to watch, but it's still interesting watching people kind of like go around it, just because because the cars are just driving really quick on quite technical things.
I think
that pushes the drivers to make mistakes, or
and I think you can connect it to races that have happened before. When you're on these historic tracks, there's something romantic about watching modern Formula One cars scream down the start-finish straight at Monza in the way that, you know, Andretti, Clark, Stewart, Fangio did 50 years ago, you know, on the same piece of tarmac. You layer all of that history up to a venue that makes you feel like it connects the present with the past, and Formula One is Formula One because of its history. And so these historic tracks will always have, so even if they don't always have a lot of on-track racing, will always have that extra bit of mystique, because there's something special about winning the British Grand Prix, because there's always been a British Grand Prix, same as with the Italian Grand Prix. So what are we, and particularly, you know, the other thing with the US is there are so many great tracks that Formula One, you know, not just the ones that Formula One has raced on, but it'd be, you know, you're thinking of sort of Watkins Glen, where they've raced there, and Road America, in terms of distance, is probably track distance, because they have a lot of little circuits in America, and obviously they have ovals. But I mean, Formula One and oval might be quite interesting.
Well, so the old Indianapolis circuit was part oval, wasn't it? And then they went into the middle of the.
I even preferred old Indianapolis, which was a bit long straight. Twist, get back to the end of start the straight and go again. But I think because you're Indy, it kind of like just was a bit more interesting than with those massive grandstands than cruising around Texas.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm on board. I think when I thought about it, no, do you know what? Like, I mean, I wonder if you could, if Barcelona should just be sort of like the F1 testing circuit, as they seem to love it so much for that, and they can do all their testing there because of the mixture of corners it has, but then they race somewhere else.
So obviously they do have to have a race in Spain, because there was Fernando Alonso, now there's Carlos Sainz, and there's also just like a big appetite for Formula One in Spain. What other tracks do you know? Do you know of any? Isn't there one in Seville that's like quite interesting? I mean, the only other one was the street circuit in Valencia.
I think it'd be quite. I mean, you could go to Jerez, where F1 has raced in the past, but that's really tight and twisty. So I don't think you're getting a better race there. I certainly think that. So in terms of tracks that I would love for Formula One to go back to. Going back and sort of thinking at tracks that they used to race on, it'd be great. Hockenheim is one that I would love Formula One to go back to, but pre 2002 Hockenheim. So they're going back through the forest, disappearing. I take out the chicanes as well. So they go off into the forest, disappear from view. I probably wouldn't even put cameras there.
Oh, so you're going really old school then.
So you have a camera at turn 1. You see them disappear off into the forest. You then have to wait a minute for them to come back round into the stadium section, and then you can sort of find out who is where. And then they whiz around the stadium section and then go off again. And then you hear rumours that apparently there's been an accident at the Ost curve. We have not seen Vettel come through.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, it'd be interesting. So I read like an article on why they had to make the changes to Hockenheim, because obviously it was, I mean, I think it was one of the longest tracks. It probably had like one of the highest average speeds of any circuit, maybe even more than Monza when it was in its like with chicane, when it was like before they shortened it. And apparently the straights were so long that the engines would be revving at top revs for too long, and it would just wear them out completely. However, it's only been relatively recently that engines have had to be really durable. Because like even if you look at races in the early like noughties, the amount of DNFs because of like mechanical failure was so high still compared to now. You wonder if they could, if you forced a car around Old Hockenheim now, whether they'd still be able to put up with it or not.
I hope not. I think reliability was interesting, and I think it's better to have more cars in the race, and it's better for sustainability that they're not building these parts to fail the lap after the race ends, to get maximum performance out of them. But nevertheless, it was one of the things that made up for the fact that it was difficult to overtake. That basically up until the end of the late sort of the mid noughties, there was a high degree of unreliability in races. And yeah, you had circuits like Hockenheim that were known as sort of engine killers, and you get less than 10 cars finishing, and all of that were exciting elements that made up a Formula One race that don't anymore. But yeah, I would love to see them screaming around Hockenheim again. Another circuit where they don't have to change, but I think, and they've raced on reasonably recently for 2 seasons, and this wouldn't be to replace Suzuka, but it would just be in addition, was Fuji. I thought that was a really cool circuit. Just a really dramatic setting, undulating terrain, a historic venue as well, good overtaking opportunity. Even in 2007-8, in the years that they ran it there was a fair bit of passing. Always get interesting climatic conditions, obviously in the foothills of a mountain in Japan in the time of year that they would race. So 2 races in Japan, one at Suzuka, one in Fuji. I'd be all in for that. And my other swap is going back to Adelaide for the Australian Grand Prix. It's always had a similar feel as in terms of a sort of like a street circuit come sort of park circuit. Nice long back straight for overtaking. A lot of historical significance. A lot of famous races took place there. There were a lot of famous incidents at Adelaide. Obviously, Hill and Schumacher in '94, Mansell famously blowing up in '86. The shortest Formula One race ever in '91.
What was that one?
There was just a lot of rain. It was a mad race that they never should have started.
Oh, okay.
Bernie had a gun to all of the drivers' heads. You will start the race. They got past the minimum distance of a race that a race can last for it to be declared a race.
Oh, and then they all just
they stopped.
Okay.
And then the race was red flagged. So yeah. Nothing too much against Melbourne, but that's also a difficult one in terms of overtaking. Well, we will be back in 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. So there's the week off this weekend, then so the weekend of the 22nd, 21st is Monaco.
So post the next phase in the roadmap out of lockdown restrictions, we will be delivering this podcast from a Cheek by Jowl pub, hugging people but safely, and yes, talking more Formula One on Very
Much
Mistaken.